Has debate jargon become too much of a chore? Does every round you enter leave you wanting to know more? Well, look no further because one clap is the key. It's time for Professor Graham and Kevin's ABCs. Hello debaters and welcome back to another episode of Professor Graham's ABCs of Debate. I'm Professor Graham, here with my pal Kevin, and today the word of the day is going to be inherency. So without further ado, let's jump into it. Inherency is one of the 5 stock issues, along with significance, solvency, topicality, and harms. Most of the others will passively cover throughout the rest of the episodes, but inherency is kind of a weird one, so let's just unpack it. First off, inherency is just a needlessly fancy word to describe the situation of what's occurring now. In policy debate terms, typically inherency is the quote-unquote barrier as to why the affirmatives plan needs to happen or hasn't happened yet. Take, for example, the Inflation Reduction Act passed by the Biden administration just last year. If you were to say that your plan is to pass the IRA, then your affirmative would be lacking inherency because your plan has already happened. I wouldn't really think about inherency in terms that aren't directly tied to the action of the plan. For example, if your opponents are reading a poverty contention and you argue that solving poverty is not inherent because some other bills have already done that, you haven't exactly advanced an inherency press as much as you've just reduced the size of their impacts because they solve for less people than they initially claimed. In that instance, you've just made a solvency press, not an inherency attack. Moving on. Technically speaking, there's 3 kinds of inherency. 2 really weird ones and only one that ever matters. The 3 kinds are structural inherency, attitudinal inherency, and existential inherency. Existential is the least useful because it refers to the inherency of impacts, which, as I just mentioned, isn't really an argument. Saying that an impact is 100% solved for is quite silly, and typically it's just advancing a solvency argument that they don't solve as much of something as they say they are. Next up on the pedestal, attitudinal inherency, which is also fairly useless, because it makes the argument that there is a mental block preventing the plan from coming to fruition, which doesn't make a lot of sense. The last one, structural inherency, is the only one that is ever used in round, which is saying something because it's an issue in maybe 1 in every 1 million rounds, if I'm being generous. Structural inherency is the exact example we had before. If a policy already exists, then you're not allowed to run it. Taking the policy topic, for example, if the United States somehow miraculously decides to pass a universal basic income policy in the next year, well, any AF that sought to do a similar policy would be non-inherent. That's actually a fair point, Kevin. Why do we care if the AF has already happened? Doesn't that mean that there's tons of literature on that issue? Well, the largest point of conflict usually stems from the basic win condition of the affirmative, proving that their diversion from the status quo is a good thing and that the way that the world is now is bad. If they advocate for a plan that has already happened, then that is the status quo and is a pseudo-endorsement of the negative team. Inherency on its own isn't particularly complicated to learn, but learning all the stock issues, I understand, can be quite a chore. Offer? I hardly know her. Hey, thanks again for watching today's episode of Professor Graham's ABCs of Debate. As always, I'm Professor Graham, and that's my pal Kevin. Yeah, if you ever need any help with debate stuff at all, my email should be right up here. Just make sure you CC your coach. I'll get back to you as soon as I possibly can with any debate tips that you might need. I'll drop that knowledge on you. Bam. Thanks for watching. It's been a pleasure. See y'all later.